One brother Roop, still here. Just talked about Stephen. Now I'm going to talk about Luke. Luke is the author of the book of Acts. He's also the author of the Gospel of Luke. Luke was an amazing guy. Luke's seen everything. He's seen most of the beginning of Christianity, all the great highlight stuff of the early church. Jesus picked him out, and he followed Jesus throughout his entire ministry. And unlike the other disciples, Luke was a medical doctor. He was highly educated, so that tells us he came from a prosperous family. And back in those days, either you were prosperous or you were poor. So not much middle class back then. So he came from a prosperous family, got a good education, became a medical doctor. But he abandoned all that to follow this poor carpenter in Galilee. He apparently knew something we didn't know, Everybody else back then didn't know. So he started following Jesus Christ in his entire ministry. And he was there at the beginning of the church. He was there in the upper room. He was there at Peter's preaching the first sermon. He was there with Stephen. He recorded Stephen's stories, so he had to been there to know what happened. So when Stephen was arrested, Luke was there. He might have been arrested with him. He witnessed Stephen's speech before the Sanhedrin. He didn't record his death. He said he was stoned to death, but he said he was taken outside town, stoned to death, so he didn't witness that. Apparently they let Luke go, or Luke wasn't arrested, but he was there for the Sanhedrin council defense, but didn't witness his death. After Stephen's death, he paired up with Peter. Remember, back in those days, the disciples paired up, either two or more, because between towns, it was dangerous. You had a lot of bandits robbing people, and it was very dangerous traveling those days. So disciples always paired up, or more than two. So Luke, after pairing up with Stephen, Luke went with Peter, followed Peter's ministry, and wrote about Peter until Paul came around during the council. And after the council, Luke traveled with Paul. And that's how come we have a recording of Paul's ministry to the Gentiles. And so Luke is traveling through, is witnessing church history, and every time he pairs up with somebody, we're seeing a history of that person. He never talks about himself and his ministry. I'm sure Luke was preaching, and Luke was teaching, and I'm sure Luke was laying hands on people and healing people. But he never wrote about himself. That tells me he was a very, very modest, humble man. He was always recording the great acts of other Christians, other disciples. I think that's why I always liked Luke. I always thought he was a great Christian, a great man of God. And I always had a soft part for Luke. So he's definitely one of the heroes of the faith. Thank you.